Hi everyone. This is the part one of the chapter one lecture, recorded lecture. Sorry, I just want to get it like where it's bigger. Okay, so chapter one is called Introduction to Biology. No surprise there. Um, there are several characteristics that living things share. So if it's a living thing or an organism, all living organisms have these characteristics. So you need to learn them and you need to learn some examples of each one. Um, and I'll just talk about them one at a time and then we'll go through them. I think there should be individual slides. But order, the first level of organization or order in living things is the atom, because all matter, whether it's solid, liquid, or gas, is composed of elements, and individual elements are atoms. So it begins with an atom, and then atoms are arranged to form molecules. Molecules are arranged to form cell parts called organelles. And then you have the first, the simplest level of a living thing that has all the characteristics of living things is the cell. So all living things are at least as big as one cell. They're at least one cell big. Multicellular organisms like animals and plants can have billions or even trillions of individual cells. So they're organized into tissues, and tissues are organized into organs, and so on. And the next characteristic is sensitivity or response to the environment. Um, Lots of examples of that. Plants growing toward the light. Um, for a human, a response to bright light would be to blink. Just it's a respond to some type of stimulus in the environment. And reproduction means that all living things are capable of producing offspring that are similar to themselves. Reproduction can be sexual reproduction with a mixing of chromosomes from two different parents, or it can be asexual where the adult just makes a clone of itself. Then we have growth and development. Growth just means getting larger, usually happens by cells dividing and making more cells, cell reproduction. And then development would be the stages that organisms go through from birth to death. Regulation, all organisms have mechanisms in place so that they can regulate certain processes. And homeostasis is related to that. Homeostasis is regulating and maintaining a constant internal environment, whether that be temperature or pH, or like with humans, heart rate and blood pressure, glucose levels, blood glucose levels, oxygen levels, breathing rate. I could go on and on. And then energy processing, primarily in Bio 111, we just deal with photosynthesis and cellular respiration as the two main cellular chemical reactions that either produce energy, take food and break it down and produce energy, or use sunlight energy to make food. And here you see a green toad, a European green toad. Um, this toad is organized starting with atoms and molecules and organelles, and then it's organized into billions of cells. And those cells can group together and form tissues, such as the tissue that forms its outer covering or skin, um, the tissue that forms its muscles, the tissue that forms its nervous system, its brain. Um, and then here, there's actually a video that shows you these. This is, I know you've probably seen mimosa trees. Mimosa trees are the ones that have those big, huge pink flowers. They're really pretty and they smell good. Um, they turn brown though, and they're messy. So some people don't like them, but they're really beautiful when they bloom. But you can touch those little individual leaflets, and hormones, they're not really called hormones in plants, but these chemicals will be sent through the vascular system, through the vascular system or the veins of these little leaflets, so that all of the leaflets will close up. And you can see that in a video if you go to your study plan. And that's just an example of response, response to our environment. And then this, of course, is a mother with her puppies, a mother dog with her puppies. Organisms can reproduce, creating new life. That's another property. And then it also coincides with organisms grow and develop. Growing is getting larger, so the puppy's getting larger and becoming an adult. And development is the different stages that they go through, from the zygote stage, which is the first cell that forms into a puppy, and a zygote is like the fertilized egg, and that zygote becomes an embryo, and the embryo becomes a fetus, and then the fetus becomes unborn mature puppy, and then the puppy goes through stages, kind of goes through an adolescent stage, and not as severe as humans, but they go through one, and then they become adults, and then they go through the stages of adulthood, and then death and dying. So this polar bear has regulatory mechanisms to cope with the stress of how cold it is, and it has a lot of fat for heat, and also as energy reserves, because sometimes it has to go long periods without food. And then we've got here energy processing, which I told you earlier, that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are actually the reactions that we're going to concentrate on. So we're going to talk about organization in a little bit more detail. So the first characteristic that living things have is that they're organized, that they have a certain order. And the way that living things are organized begins with the atom, and then atoms form molecules. You see over here on the right, you see an image of a molecule that was built, with plastic parts, obviously, but is a model. I couldn't think of the word model. I'm sorry. It happens sometimes. But anyway, so this is a model of DNA, which is a very large molecule composed of many smaller atoms, atoms of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and phosphorus. And so DNA is actually such a large molecule, we call it a macromolecule. You've probably heard of macromolecules more with like nutrition, because your nutritionists will tell you that you need to get your macros, and that means get your carbohydrates, your proteins, and your fats, your healthy fats. So DNA is one of those macros. It's a macromolecule. Protein is a macromolecule. And then macromolecules form organelles, which is another word for little cell parts that help the cell function. And this is a list of the organization of living things, starting with organelles, moving all the way to the biosphere. So make sure that you learn this list in order. Organelles, cells, cells group together to form tissues, tissues group together to form organs, several organs work together to form organ systems, and all the organ systems in a living thing forms the organism, unless it is a single-celled or unicellular organism like a bacteria, and then its level of organization stops at the cell. That's the only time. So with organisms, groups of organisms of the same species are populations. So a population is a group of organisms of the same species. a very common, they've got pine trees here. Very common pine tree in North Carolina is the loblolly pine. So if I were to say the number of loblolly pines in North Carolina, the population of loblolly pines in North Carolina, but I couldn't say the population of trees because that's not a specific species. So the population is all the members of a single species that live in a particular area. Community would be all of the living things in a particular habitat, and then the ecosystem would be the community plus the habitat. It would be the biotic part and the abiotic part. And then the biosphere are all of the ecosystems on the entire Earth. Okay, so we know that living things are composed of at least one cell. All cells have 4 components. It doesn't matter what type of cell it is, it's got a plasma membrane. And sometimes that is called a cell membrane. It's got a fluid, a kind of a like a gel type fluid called cytoplasm inside the plasma membrane. It contains DNA, that's its genetic material. And then it also contains ribosomes, which are structures that are used to make proteins, to synthesize proteins. So this is an example of a prokaryotic cell. There are 2 types of cells. There are prokaryotic cells or prokaryotes, and then there are eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes. So here you see a typical prokaryotic cell, and we know it's prokaryotic because it does not contain a nucleus. It has a region called the nucleoid region, and that is where its DNA is located, but it's just a region of space inside the plasma membrane. It contains no membrane-bound organelles. Now, since it is a cell, it contains ribosomes, but it doesn't contain membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, like endoplasmic reticulum, like, a nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle. The Golgi apparatus or the Golgi complex. These structures that we're going to learn about in a later chapter, the chapter on cells, prokaryotic cells don't have these organelles. Prokaryotic cells do have a cell wall. Some prokaryotic cells have outside that cell wall a capsule, which can be a solid substance or it can even be like a layer, like a slime layer. But the capsule oftentimes helps the bacteria, the prokaryotic cell, to adhere to a surface, to stick to something, or to stick to other bacteria. Some prokaryotes have pili, which are little hair-like structures that also help the cell to stick to a surface or to stick to other bacterial cells. Prokaryotic cells are usually bacteria, but they can also be another type of organism called an archaea. But anyway, that's why I keep saying bacteria, because bacteria are prokaryotic. Some bacteria, the ones that move, have a flagella, which is a whip-like tail that helps it to move in water. Here's a practice question. It says, let's revisit the hierarchy chart for blood cells. How would this be different for a prokaryotic cell? So for a prokaryotic cell, it would start with organelles, and then it would go to cells, and then it would skip tissues, organs, organ systems, and then it would start back again at organisms, because a prokaryotic cell is a full, complete, entire organism. It's just made of one cell. So it would just skip the tissues and skip the organs and organ systems. But you can still have populations of prokaryotes. You can have populations of different types of bacteria and archaea.